I hope that everybody is doing well. Um, I finally, like 2 minutes ago, so I like finally is no exaggeration, posted the link to the proof checker. So I apologize that I dropped the ball again. Thank goodness, Zeba. I think it was you who asked. Thank goodness, Zeba, you asked for it. I think it was you who asked for it. Thank goodness Jasmine was on the ball and posted the link in the chat. But I did finally post it on our course homepage under our course resources module. As a reminder, under that module, I know I already mentioned that there's additional practice if you want it, but there are also the PDFs of the textbook. So even though the PDFs aren't interactive the way that the web-based textbook is interactive, if for some reason you want the PDF, the Dr. Schnee made those available, which is yay, which is good. I did one thing I haven't done yet. Victoria is following. I haven't followed up entirely on the good point you raised about one of the exercises in exam 2, but the retest has been the issue that you raised has been resolved. But as far as adding back the point, I haven't done that yet, but I'll get there. I promise. And I know you'll keep on top of things too. So where are we? We are in the middle of a bunch of practice. What I'd like to do is resume that practice with particular attention to the two rules that we haven't discussed in a lot of detail. They're given to us in I think it's chapter 13, specifically the contradiction rule, namely the introduction of the contradiction we get. I think we understand that when you have a sentence and its negation, those two sentences are contradictory from a truth functional standpoint. Those, if you were to conjoin those two sentences, you'd have a tautological falsity, right? You'd have a sentence that is false on every row of the truth table in the column under the conjunction, right? So I think we get what a contradiction is. I think what is not always as obvious is why it is that when you're in a negation intro subproof sequence, generating a contradiction is the moment that you exit the subproof and you say, that assumption that generated the contradiction can't be true, right? We've talked a bit about it in terms of a valid argument, specifically what happens when we, by way of an indirect truth table, we assume the conclusion is false, generate a contradiction, which tells us that that conclusion that conclusion's status as false can't be maintained, right? And so then I said, that we put it on the vertical, right? So we want to push on that a little bit more. And then I've got an example from a philosopher that I think is quite nice. So I thought I'll share it with you and see if that helps to make some sense of the contradiction itself. But then this example is actually specific to the second contradiction rule that we already learned, namely the elimination of the contradiction. So we've been saying all the way, so as far back as I think chapter 3, weird cases of validity, right? From a contradiction, anything follows, and that might feel mentally, intellectually a little bit peculiar. And then I've talked about the contradiction elimination rule in terms of this idea from a contradiction, anything follows. But I think the example that I want to offer might help us to recognize that if it feels a little bit like we're cheating when immediately after a contradiction we assert the sentence we want, that's actually not the case. We're not cheating, right? There's nothing logically problematic about it. Okay, so let me do this first. Are any questions, problems, confusions about what we've been working on? Any of the exercises that you've either been working on or that we were working on together in class? So far, so good. All right, so I'll take silence as approval. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Let's first do a little bit of warm up, if you will. Sorry, let me get some stuff going here. All right, so okay, so we're in specifically right now. We're going to chat more about chapter 13. So, but here's what I want to label this whiteboard. So this should be so that should be 11, 12, and 13. Okay, so chapters 11 through 13 continued. Does everybody remember that there are some sentences that are tautologies? That is, there are sentences that are true on every row of the truth table and the column under the main connective. So when you have a sentence that's, if you will, true in all possible worlds, it really doesn't matter what scenario you're in, the sentence comes out true. So one question we can ask is this: how do we prove such a sentence? Another way to think about it is this: if you have just a single sentence that is always true, you don't actually have an argument, right? An argument requires, two statements, two sentences, one of which, at least two sentences, I should say, at least two sentences, one of which is the premise, one is the conclusion. But so what do we make of the logically true, specifically the tautological sentence? Well, it's by referring to this sentence, we have a nice entree into thinking about the idea of a logical contradiction. We have a nice entree into thinking about how the negation intro rule works, and within it, the value, if you will, of the contradiction. So let's try this. So suppose I have the following sentence. Okay, so the following, and I'm going to put up here chapter 13 focus. And then I know we want to back up a little bit too and work. There's some strategies that our textbook talks about that we want to talk more about together. So the following sentence is a tautology. So P or, oh, sorry, wrong symbol. P or not both P and Q. Okay. Let's prove it is a tautology. Right? Remember, an argument that's valid can be exhibited as valid by way of a truth table. The proof process, though, is what shows us, demonstrates by a sequence of inferences, the conclusion is entailed by the premises, right? So if we've got a sentence that's always true, we use the proof sequence to show that it's true, or sorry, rephrase, to prove that it's true. Okay, so we're going to prove that it's true using negation intro. Okay. Okay, and the strategy, so the strategy of let me erase that. So the strategy follows the indirect truth table. Assume the sentence you want to prove is false, right? Now, when we have premises, we also, or we assume, those premises are true, right? Does everybody remember the indirect truth table method? And does it make sense? Does thinking about it make sense here? Like what are we doing in a single sentence that will be analogous to the indirect truth table method for an argument? Does it make sense to say we assume that the disjunction, which is the main operator, we assume that's false, but we assume that at least one of the components, that is P or negation, right, is true. And then we work backward until we generate a contradiction. Does that make sense? What do we think? Do you want to see it? Do you want to try it? See it, try it, Dominic? Okay. All right, so P or not P and Q. So I'll assume that the sentence is false. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'll go ahead and assume that P is true. I'm not going to, since I know P is true, I can go ahead and put that value. Actually, let me go ahead and change out the color here. That way we know keep clear the difference, right? Sorry, I said true and nobody corrected me. False. In order for the disjunction to be false, each of the disjuncts has to be false. So as not to confuse others, I'll edit that out of the thing, right? So if disjunction is false, P and negation have to be false. And in all seriousness, I mean, yes, I'm supposed to catch my own errors. In fact, I'm not even supposed to make errors, but I do. Don't be shy about piping up and saying, Mia, if you're going to assume the disjunction is false, each of the disjuncts has to be false, not true. You're thinking of conjunction. I'll pick on Zeba and Victoria because Victoria and Zeba are the ones who are usually willing to pipe up. Arshak as well, in point of fact, but. All right, so in order to maintain that the disjunction is false, right? Each of the Ziva. In order to maintain that the disjunction is false, each of the disjuncts have to be false, right? So if the negation is false, then I'm going to change colors again. Then that means that the conjunction has to be true, right? For the conjunction to be true, each of the conjuncts has to be true. Q has to be true and P has to be true. But hello, I've said P is false, right? So here's our contradiction. P can't be both true and false. Pick one. And if we pick one, then we're going to show that the disjunction, that is, right, the main operator has to be true. And that indirect truth table is the shorthand way of, constructing a complete truth table where we would see in the column under the disjunction, T, right? So 4 rows. Does this make sense? What do we think? So, this sentence must be true. Okay? Now, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to take this indirect truth table method that we use for full arguments. We're going to use it to prove a tautology. And in so doing, we're going to see, I hope, the power of a contradiction. We've been focusing on a specifically We've been focusing specifically on a truth functional contradiction, but there are other ways to generate contradictions as well. We'll talk about those. All right, so here we go. New whiteboard. So the sentence is, here's what I'm going to do, and this is the format that we use when we're dealing with a premiseless proof. We're going to leave line 1 blank, and then we'll start at line 2, and I'm just drawing the vertical line to show, right, that we're working a subproof, right? We can, I haven't thrown one of these types of, I haven't thrown a tautology into the proof checker. So we'll have to look and see how the proof checker deals with this formatting. But what I'm doing is one way to approach the thing. So this is what we do. We assume that the whole sentence, it's not the case that A or not both A, or no, I was doing P and Q. Sorry about that. P or not both P and Q are true. By the way, I keep getting a notice from Zoom saying that my internet connection is unstable. Let me know if that instability is impacting any visual or any video or audio. Okay, tell me if I should repeat something. Okay, so we're going to assume the whole sentence is false, and let's give ourselves plenty of room. We're going to generate a contradiction, right, that tells us that assumption that the sentence is false can't be maintained. In other words, it's not the case that not P or not both P and Q is the case. And then, so strictly speaking, that's what we do. We get out of the subproof and we introduce a negation. But in our version of the system, in most versions of the system, people will go straight to the affirmed sentence. But just so that we can see literally every step of the way, this is what we get. And then we get back out and we have the sentence P or not both P and Q. Okay? Now, you might be looking at this assumption at line 2 thinking, oh my gosh, how the HE double hockey sticks am I supposed to work with that? Right? I mean, am I allowed to, run De Morgan's on the whole thing? Will that allow me to dismantle? Sure, it could. We could certainly do that. And in fact, we may go ahead and try that. But what if we try not to use any rule except what's given to us in the intro and elim pairs that we have for negation, conjunction, disjunction, contradiction, and we can use read if we want. Okay? Does what I'm saying make sense? What do we think? Give me some idea of whether or not I need to clarify. Otherwise, remember, I'm taking silence as approval. You know, it's kind of like when I'm sitting just thinking, not speaking, I'm just thinking, and I'm like, oh man, I'm doing great. I'm so smart. And then the moment I open my mouth to speak, all of the gaps in my reasoning, all of the incomplete thoughts become explicit, right? But this is kind of like me, thinking, I think I must be really clear. Nobody's saying anything. Tell me if you have an issue, okay? All right, so let's work backward, right? We know that what we want, so this is our intermediate goal, right? So let's work backward from it. How might we generate a contradiction? Well, here's a way to do that. Can we generate the sentence P or not both P and Q? Right? If I have P or not both P and Q, then clearly I've got a contradiction between line 2 and whatever the line is that we have here, right? But then the next question is this: well, how do I generate this line, right? So how do I generate this sentence? Well, one way I can generate this sentence is if I have P, right? Because if I have P, then I can introduce the disjunction. Or if I have not both P and Q, it's the same thing, right? Generate a disjunction. Does that make sense? Now, the way that I think of things is as follows. I think it might be easier for me to generate P, right? Sorry, rephrase. It might be easier for me to, I'll say that, to generate P, because it's an atomic sentence. It's a simple sentence. Might be less rough going. But, I could go for not both P and Q, right? So then the question is, okay, how do I generate either one? Right? Well, let me pull some stuff off to the side. So this is important work for us to do. Let's sketch out some ideas. What if I say, okay, I want P. Well, one way that I can generate P is by assuming that it's not the case that I have P, generate a contradiction, right? And then exit the subproof, right? Of course, the tricky part there is from the assumption that not P, it's not clear to me what I'm going to be able to do. In other words, how am I going to work with the existing assumption. Right? On the other hand, what if I do this? What if I say, well, wait a minute, I can use the same approach if I assume that I have P and Q. This might, generate a contradiction. This might be easier. Why? Because what can I do with P conjunction Q? I can dismantle it. And hello, once I dismantle it, I can introduce the sentence that I want, namely P or not both P and Q, which generates this contradiction and gets me out, back out onto the main sequence. In other words, once I have this sentence, I can add P. So before I generate a new whiteboard so that I can leave this one alone, and you can go back through it if you want to, does this make sense? It's really important for us to think about how we work backward, and B, we sketch off to the side as much as we need to so that we can see our way forward, right? If you just try to stare at it and stare at the rules and stare at it, and things are going to be tricky, right? You've got to start making some calculated risks by sketching off to the side. Say, well, what do I need or what can I do in order to get here? Okay, does this make some sense? How are we doing? Any thumbs down? Anybody feeling completely uncomfortable with this? And don't be shy. It's important that we have that I have a sense of how things are going. Or is everybody just on tenterhooks? You're so excited. You can't wait to see what happens next. All right, here we go. All right, so line 1 is empty. Line 2 begins. The negation intro subproof. So this is, forgive me. This is negation intro, and this will be negation Elim. 2 through I don't know what, and we don't know yet what the citation will be for the last line. Okay. At line 3, I'm going to assume that I have both P and Q. I want a contradiction. so that I can get out and say it's not the case that P and Q, which then, remember, allows me to introduce the disjunction, which then allows me to introduce the contradiction. What was I doing? Oh, sorry. Here we go. Negation intro. Disjunction intro. Does everybody see also how we're filling in as we work, right? Working backward, working forward, working back, and we fill in as we go so we don't forget where we are. Yeah? Okay. So 3, and then this is, oh, sorry, this will be contradiction intro. And remember, look at your rule sheet and notice that when you generate a contradiction, two things are then possible. One is you assert the sentence you want, namely you eliminate the contradiction. So that's contradiction intro. The other possible move is to exit the subproof and introduce a negation. Okay, so let those parameters, those restrictions, if you will, guide you. All right, so back to the green. So at line 4, I'm going to introduce the disjunction. Take a look at your disjunction intro rule. Introduce the disjunction. From my assumptive step at line 3, which then gives me the introduction of the contradiction from lines 2 and 4. Then line 6, we already said, is the introduction of the negation from 3 through 5. Victoria, what are you thinking?
So we have row 3 and P and Q, and row 4 we introduce P and Q.
I know, I see, well, actually, no, but I see something, I skipped a step again. Oh my gosh, this whole week I've been a disaster. Victoria, thank you for your point. Let me address it in just one moment. I'm gonna go ahead and fix this mistake that I made. All right, so hold on. And then once I fix the mistake that I made, I think you'll rethink what you had just mentioned. All week long, I've been doing silly things like this. So 4 is the elimination of P from the conjunction at line 3, right? And then 5, and so now, Victoria, we haven't yet got the contradiction. 5 is the introduction of the disjunction from 4 to create the sentence that becomes the contradiction to line 2. So disjunction intro from 4, and then notice that the contradiction is between 2 and 5. Does that clear up your does that clear things up? What do you think?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Thank you. I don't know if I would have caught it until the very end. By the way, it's actually, I'm not smart enough to mess up on purpose. But it's not a bad thing when I mess things up, because for two reasons. One is, it shows us that we can be thinking one thing and doing something else. The second thing is maybe more important, which is this: the logic will get me back on track, right? So there's going to be a point where I realize the mistake I made, because the logic won't let me, if I follow the rules correctly, the logic won't let me maintain the mistake, right? I know Victoria won't let me either, so I'm covered, okay? Thank you for that. All right, so then we've got line 7, line 8, then we're back where we started, basically, although we're we're back where we started in terms of the goal of the subproof. Right? So, first question. Does it make sense to say that we've just done in a proof format the working out of the steps that we're sort of bound up in that indirect truth table? What do we think? What's our comfort level? How many people are saying thumbs up? What are people thinking? Are you loving it? Are you not loving it?
It's tricky, but it's interesting.
Okay, good. Yeah, so, one thing that I'd like, so Victoria, it seems to me that you, this stuff really, you click pretty darn quickly with it. And so I'm glad to hear you say that you're thinking about it, because what oftentimes happens for folks who just find that this stuff, just chugs right along, and the clicking just happens and you're chugging along doing your work. A lot of times people don't think about what they're doing, right? And the problem with that can be that if asked to sort of explain what it is that they got so easily, they have a hard time. So the fact that you're thinking about it is good. All right, how about we prove some equivalences? So remember, we have some statements that we have seen are truth functionally equivalent, right? So they're truth table equivalent statements. Let's go ahead and prove the equivalence. What are you thinking, Victoria?
Let's try.
By the way, Victoria, are you working it in the proof checker, or are you working it by hand?
By hand.
Okay. I'll be curious to know if anybody has tried the proof checker yet, if they like it. Okay. Was there something that you wanted to ask or add, Victoria, or should we go ahead and move into proving some equivalent statements?
Oh, excuse me. Am I hand is raised?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't apologize.
It's about row 10. We should finish it. It's 2 to 9. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So, okay. So your negation intro, thank you. Your negation intro citation is always going to be the entirety of the subproof sequence. So it's lines 2 through 9. And the fact that it includes the nested green sequence doesn't, it is, has no bearing on the fact that we're citing the whole thing. Because that nested green subproof is part of the larger sequence. Thank you for that. Oh, and then that reminds me, yeah, so then we also have to say line 9 comes from 2 and 8. And that reminds me that the, you will always use every premise given or derived at least once. You may use a premise multiple times. It just depends on what you need to get out of there. And then to get out of that premise. And then we have negation intro from 10. Excellent. Okay, so, or is it okay if I go ahead? I can come back to this, but is it okay if we go ahead to prove some equivalences? Yes, Mia, I can't wait. Oh, Victoria, you just made my day. Thank you. Oh, we got to have some fun, guys, right? I can't, it's like going outside to play. I want to play sometimes. All right. So, oh, by the way, you know how earlier Dominic had said, hey, let's look at the indirect truth table before we run the proof. Tell me if you want to look at, for example, the truth table for logic or truth functionally equivalent sentences before we run a proof, or after, right? Because sometimes seeing them together can be very helpful. All right, so how about this? So these two sentences, sorry, these two are tautologically equivalent. Right, so both P and Q are not, and neither one are equivalent to each other, truth table equivalent. We're going to prove it. Okay, so let's start by taking the second sentence as our goal. So let's lay it out this way. We've got not P, conjunction, not Q, and we want neither P nor Q, right? So let's keep going with today's theme, negation intro and the generation of a contradiction, which is essential to that rule. Okay, so remember what we do. We look at the conclusion. We say, hey, the conclusion has a negation in front of it. I'm going to work negation intro. That's my strategy. And in fact, you can use negation intro as your strategy for any proof. The reason why I hesitated as I started to say it is because I was going to say, but then realized I should keep going. I was going to say that, if you choose to use negation intro as your strategy, for a proof that could be shorter if you used a different strategy, it might end up being cumbersome, but it still is a legit way, right? It might be the scenic route. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to assume our conclusion is false, generate a contradiction, so that we can say, that assumption is not the case. That assumption can't be right. The correct sentence, the true sentence is the negation. Okay? What do we think? How are we doing? Now, I'm hoping that that makes sense. What do we think? Quick question. How many of you are saying already, okay, I know I need to prove a contradiction and I see implicit contradictions? What are we talking about? Well, check this out, folks. Implicit contradiction. Implicit contradiction. Why am I saying implicit contradiction? Well, in order for the contradiction to be explicit, you've got to dismantle the conjunction. You've got to dismantle the disjunction, right? Right now, sentence 1 is a conjunction sentence. So you've got to get not P on its own, and you've got to get not Q on its own. In addition, line 2, which is our assumptive step, so assume, and then we're working negation intro as our structuring subproof, right? In addition, the only way to get the contradiction between not P and P is to also have P on its own. How are we going to do that? I know that you know. Hello. Disjunction elimination. I'll just go ahead and prove a contradiction from each side of the disjunction. I will. So here's line 3, assumption. I'll eliminate P from line 1. And then I've got my introduction of the contradiction. Oops, I can spell. Three and 4, right? So from one side of the disjunction, yay, I've generated my contradiction. Now I'm moving on to the other side. I'll do the same thing. And P.S. Are you noticing, given that we've worked disjunction elimination a few times now in various for various arguments, that the successive subproof sequences mirror each other? So it's typically the case that what you do for one side of the disjunction elim subproof, you do for the other. So we're going to eliminate the conjunction again at line 1. This time we're getting not Q. And now we've got contradiction intro from 6 and 7. And then in either case, whether I have P or I have Q, I got a contradiction. So from line 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, I've got a contradiction, which means at line 10, what am I doing? Which means at line 10, I can introduce my negation because line 9 is the end of the structuring subproof sequence. So 2 through 9. And let's hope I didn't miss anything. Victoria, what are you thinking?
Excuse me, I can't understand why it is the Elim, not intro, not negation intro.
Oh, yeah, great question.
Elim.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that this contradiction at line 9 comes out of each of those disjunction elim sequences. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So think about it this way. Remember, if we go back to the rule form for disjunction elimination, it's some sentence that we want to prove. In this case, and what often happens is we want to prove a contradiction. So we're saying at line 9, look, whether I have P or I have Q, I've generated a contradiction. So here's my contradiction. Am I making sense?
Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. And that, I know, I don't know why it is, but we often get a little bit perplexed by that move. We think that we're introducing a contradiction, and I do hear you. And in fact, so line 9 is a contradiction. A contradiction has been generated, but has it been generated in exactly the way that we think of when we think of a truth functional contradiction? In other words, some sentence P and its negation? No. And that, yeah, I think that's why we get a little bit perplexed. Yeah. It's a great question. And I'm glad you brought it up, because that you'll remember not to get thrown by it. All right. How about we prove the equivalence back the other way? I know. I'm feeling really frisky today. So let's do it. What do you think? Who's feeling frisky with me? Or as Dr. Gillis likes to say, who's feeling spicy today? Am I the only one who's feeling spicy? All right. Here we go. Back the other way. Let's hope I don't mess things up and run out of room. So, same thing, except the other direction. This time we've got neither P nor Q, and we want not P and not Q. Okay. All right, hold on just one second. So Daniel says, right. Yes, Daniel. Yeah. That's effectively what we're saying, is that when we have line 1 and then we assume we have line 2, we're going to end up with a contradiction. We can't have both at the same time. Does that make sense? Tell me if it doesn't. Oh, check mark. Okay. All right. So, what do people want to do? How do you want to set this bad boy up? Should we go ahead and work another indirect proof, which is to say, should we work another negation intro? Why not? Why not? Let's do it. So it's not the case that not P and not Q. Oopsie. You know what I'm wondering? Because, you know, my writing is already so bad, so illegible. I'm wondering if I should just move this onto the next page. Next page. All right, so let's try again. So we're working neither P nor Q, this time to not P and not Q. And we're going to assume, can I also, while it's on my mind, remind you that because our keypad, whether we're on a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a tower, whatever keypad we've got, we can't write the vertical line, right, unless we use some drawing tool that we might not have. But the keypad itself, right, not the trackpad, doesn't let us do that. So remember that the way that we denote indented sequences, that is assumptive proofs, nested assumptive proofs, is by the pipe, the vertical pipe, right? Okay, so we're going to assume it's not the case that not P and not Q. We want to generate a contradiction, so we can exit the subproof and say it's not the case that not both not P and not Q, which is to say not P and not Q. So we're working negation intro. Please don't forget that I think like 99% of the time in our textbook moves straight to the affirmed sentence. It doesn't introduce a second negation when the subproof is exited and then eliminates it, right? I'm just doing it to make sure that we see that step, which is technically taken, right? So negation intro, negation elim, and then here's our assumptive proof, or our assumptive step, okay? Now, once again, if you say, there are a lot of negations flying around, this is how am I supposed to generate a contradiction? Well, here you're probably going to want to generate the sentence P or Q, so that you can generate a contradiction to line 1. If you can generate the sentence not P and not Q, again, you've got a contradiction, this time to line 2, right? So think about working backwards. So, how am I going to generate my contradiction, right? So I'm going to pull stuff off to the side to see what might work, right? So if I get P or Q, then I get my contradiction to line 1. Okay. How do I get P or Q? Well, I can assume. Assumptions are great. As long as you discharge them, assumptions are wonderful, right? So how do I get P or Q? I can assume P. And now something interesting is happening here. If I assume P, so now I do it. I'm working off to the side. If I assume P, then I get P or Q, which gets me a contradiction. And then, oh, hello, negation intro. Oh, if I do this also for Q, I'll get not Q, which I can conjoin with not P. And then I get the contradiction that I want, that blue contradiction. What do you think? Oh, you know what? I'm going to change colors just so that nobody thinks that this is a disjunction Elim animal. And she did it again. Ran out of room. hold on. And I'll bring a little red in here. Unless, does that distract you from what the symbol means? Or are you okay with it? Okay. Assume P. Introduce the disjunction. Generate the contradiction. Introduce the negation. Assume Q. Introduce the disjunction. Generate the contradiction. Exit the subproof end. Introduce the negation. Conjoin the results of the two negation intro subproofs. Generate a contradiction. Exit the subproof. Introduce the negation. And then eliminate the negation. Pretty nifty. Now, is this too scunched? Do you want me to spread it out more? What do you think? Let me go ahead and see how it looks when we start citing and justifying. Okay, so we've got assume, we've got disjunction intro from line 3 to line 4. At line 5, we've got the contradiction intro from 1 and 4. Line 6, negation intro from 3 through 5. Another assumptive step. The introduction of the disjunction from line 7. The introduction of the contradiction. Again, line 1 and this time 8. Exit the subproof. The introduction of the negation from 7 through 9. The introduction of the conjunction of lines 6 and 10. And yeah, things are a little mushed, so hold on just a sec. Oopsie. Right, so we've got the introduction of the I wrote an ampersand, of the contradiction from 2 and 11. And then we're back out to the conclusion. Oh boy, that's, how did I write that so ugly? P and not Q. And that is negation intro from 2 through 12. All right, so thoughts? We're dismantling and assembling within, most of the time, a subproof sequence, a structuring subproof sequence, the subproof that serves as the blueprint or the template for a given derivation. What do we think? How's the working backward part going? And the working forward, I should say, too. Okay, Arshak's feeling pretty good. We ready for another set of equivalences? And while you're thinking about that, all right, so there is a question on the table. Is line 6 a conclusion of the subproof starting at line 3? It is. Yes, 3 through 6 is a single proof sequence. So 3 through 5 is the subproof portion of that sequence, and then 6 is what terminates the sequence. Yeah, great question. And then do you also see that that's the same for 7 through 10? 7 through 9 is the sequence, the subproof sequence, and then 10 is the exit, the termination of that subproof sequence. Okay. The promised truth table, right? So the truth table, it shows or exhibits the equivalence. The proof proves it, or the derivation proves it. The proof establishes it. Proof shows us how we get from one to the other. Whereas the truth table tells us how we get the values to begin with, the proof, or sorry, the table tells us, says that these are equivalent. The proof shows us how we get from one to the other. All right, so if you're okay, without objection, let's move on to another set of equivalences. How about these guys? So we did the neither. How about the not both? Right? And then we'll want to go the other direction. So sentence 1 says not both P and Q are the case. And the conclusion, which I've just thrown behind a slash, forward slash, is so either P is not the case or Q is not the case. You don't have both of them, but you don't know which one you don't have. So here again, we can do something like this. We can say, okay, I will reject the equivalence, basically. Generate a contradiction so that I can get out and say, so here's 2. Okay. So given the pattern that we're seeing, what do you think that we're going to take as our approach to generating a contradiction? For example, do I say, well, if I can derive P and I can derive Q, I can conjoin them which contradicts line 1. So a question then is, okay, so how do I derive each? Do I do something like this? Do I say, well, what if I say that I have respectively not P and then eventually not Q, which allows me to introduce the disjunction, which then allows me to contradict line 2. That would get me a negation intro for each, right? So think about it this way. Can I do this? All right, so I want P conjunction Q, which means that I want P, I want Q. How am I going to get these? Well, do I assume not P, generate a contradiction, right? So that I exit and say, therefore, it's not the case that not P, namely P. And do I do the same thing for Q? Assume not Q, generate a contradiction, exit the subproof, right? Negation intro. And if I think that that's the way to go, then what I want to do is split up the current green P and Q, right? What do we think? Quick question. Just tell me what your thoughts are. Does this make sense? Do you like this? Do you not like it? How are we doing? What do we think? So let me try this. Hold on just a sec. I want to see if saving all this, if this, and then if I erase, if this is going to work. Okay. So if I assume I have not P, that means I have not P or not Q, which means I have a contradiction, which means not P is not the case, P is the case. And what if I do this, actually bear with me because I need to make some more room. I should erase this too. Here. So we wanted P conjunction Q, which gets us the contradiction, which gets us not P or not Q. There we go. Okay. And now we'll do the same thing here. We've got not Q. We generate the sentence that gets us our contradiction, which gets us not Q, which we then, oh, sorry, forgive me. Sorry. Gets us Q. Which we then can conjoin with P and Q. Okay, so before we start filling everything in, work backward so that we can see our way forward. What do we think? And just for the sake of time, I'm going to just use the same color for the line numbers and the citations and justifications. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Assume, introduce the disjunction, introduce the contradiction, 2 and 4, and then introduce the negation, 3 through 5. Line 7, assume, introduce the disjunction, introduce the contradiction, again to this time 8, introduce the negation. We've exited the subproof, right? This time 7 through 9. Now at 11, we're conjoining lines 6 and 10, which gets us our final contradiction. And that's 1 and 11. And then we introduce the negation from 2 through 12. Whew! What do we think? How are we doing? Who wants to use the proof checker to go the other direction? We won't have time to do it today, but if you want to work it, we can go over it on Tuesday. One thing we didn't get to today was the promised discussion of the contradiction Elim rule. But I promise we will get to it. I will make a note to self to start that on Tuesday, unless there's stuff that you want to talk about. But we didn't use the contradiction Elim rule today, so I'm not too worried that we haven't talked about it. We know that it is what it is. We know how it works. We just maybe don't understand the why. So I definitely want to get to that. But what do we think about this one? We've proven that these two claims are, you can get from one to the other. And we see from the truth table, it's because they're equivalent. Now remember, just because you can get from one claim to another does not by itself mean that they're equivalent, right? So in a proof, you're going to see that getting from one set of claims to another claim doesn't mean that the set is equivalent across the board. But when the sentences are equivalent, we can prove that equivalence by getting from one to the other. Thoughts, questions, problems, confusions, anything you want to talk about? All right. Well, I'll stick around if there's anything that you want to chat about. Don't forget, of course, I also have office hours. If you can't make my office hours, don't worry. We can find another time to meet. But unless you have questions, problems, confusions, have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.